In the middle of one of the most remote deserts on Earth, there is a hole in the ground that has been on fire for decades. No one planned for it to last this long. In fact, the people who started it expected the flames to die out within a few weeks. That was more than 50 years ago. The fire is still burning. This is the Darvaza gas crater, a pit roughly the size of an American football field, sitting alone in the Karakum desert of Turkmenistan. At night, the glow is visible from miles away across the flat, featureless sand. Locals and travelers who have stumbled upon it after dark describe the same thing, a roaring, pulsing orange light rising from the desert floor, completely without context, completely without warning. They call it the gate to hell. The door to hell. The gates of hell. The Turkmenistan government once tried to rebrand it more diplomatically as the Shining of Karakum. The name never caught on. To understand why this hole exists, and why the fire inside it cannot seem to be stopped, you have to go back to the Soviet Union, to a drilling operation in one of the most gas-rich territories in the world, and to a decision made under pressure that has now outlasted the country that made it. Turkmenistan sits on an extraordinary amount of natural gas. The country holds the fourth largest proven natural gas reserves on the planet, with the vast majority of that wealth buried beneath the Karakum desert. The Karakum covers roughly 70% of Turkmenistan's entire land area, a vast, arid expanse of black sand and dry heat that stretches from the Caspian in the west to the borders of Afghanistan and Uzbekistan in the east. For Soviet planners, it was a resource frontier. In the 1960s and into the 1970s, geologists were regularly dispatched into it to find new pockets of extractable gas. In 1971, a Soviet drilling team was working a site near the small settlement of Darvaza, in the north of the country about 260 kilometers from the capital Ashgabat. They were drilling into what they believed was a promising formation in the Amu Darya Basin, one of Central Asia's most productive hydrocarbon-bearing geological structures. At some point during the operation, the ground beneath the drilling platform gave way. What happened next is not fully captured in any surviving official record. Soviet documentation from this period is incomplete, much of it was never made public, and Turkmenistan has no official government account of the incident at all. What researchers and geologists have pieced together from local testimony and geological evidence is this: the drill punctured a massive underground cavern filled with natural gas. The roof of that cavern collapsed. The drilling rig, the equipment, and the camp above it fell in. A crater opened in the desert floor, approximately 70 meters wide and 30 meters deep, and it immediately began venting methane gas into the air at an alarming rate. Methane is colorless and odorless, but in the concentrations pouring out of that hole, it was dangerous. The nearby village of Darvaza, whose name translates simply to gate in the Turkmen language, was at risk. The engineers were facing a potential environmental catastrophe in the middle of an already inhospitable desert with no infrastructure to handle it. So they made a decision. They would burn off the gas. The logic was straightforward: burning methane converts it into carbon dioxide and water vapor, both far less hazardous than raw methane accumulating on the surface. The engineers calculated that the underground gas supply would exhaust itself in a matter of weeks. Once ignited, the fire would go out on its own, and the problem would be contained. They lit the crater. The weeks passed. The fire did not go out. The months passed. The fire did not go out. The Soviet Union eventually collapsed in 1991, Turkmenistan became an independent country, and the crater had been burning continuously for roughly 2 decades by that point. The fire still did not go out. This is where the story becomes more complicated, and more interesting, than the standard account. Because the 1971 date, so consistently repeated as the year this fire started, may not actually be when the fire started at all. When Canadian explorer George Kourounis descended into the crater in 2013, he spoke with local Turkmen geologists who told him something different. According to them, the crater itself formed in the 1960s, possibly as early as 1963, not 1971. And the fire was not set until the 1980s, potentially not until 1987 or 1988. A 2025 peer-reviewed scientific study using historical satellite imagery from Landsat 4 and 5 confirmed this timeline, determining through thermal and radiance band analysis that combustion at the Darvaza site began between late 1987 and early 1988. Not 1971. Closer to 40 years of continuous fire than 50, though by any measure, it is extraordinary. What is not in dispute is the scale of what is down there. The Amudarya Basin, beneath which the crater sits, contains some of the largest natural gas deposits in the world. The crater was not, as the Soviets likely assumed, sitting above a finite pocket that would burn itself out. It was sitting above a vast, pressurized reservoir with essentially no interest in being exhausted. The fire found fuel that would last not weeks but generations. Now think about what Kourounis found when he went down into it. In November 2013, Kourounis became the first person ever recorded to descend to the floor of the burning Darvaza crater. The expedition was funded by National Geographic and was later featured in the National Geographic Channel series Die Trying. To survive the descent, Kourounis wore a full-body aluminized fire proximity suit with a self-contained breathing apparatus, attached to a custom-made Kevlar harness and Technora ropes of the type used on NASA Mars missions. The ground temperature at the crater floor was recorded at approximately 400 degrees Celsius. He had 17 minutes. What he described from inside is unlike almost any experience a human being has ever had on the surface of this planet. He described it as a coliseum of fire, in every direction, thousands of small individual flames burning from the walls and floor of the crater, each fed by a separate fissure in the rock. The sound, he said, was like a jet engine. A roaring, high-pressure, continuous gas-burning noise. And there was no smoke. The gas burned cleanly, giving him an unobstructed view of the entire interior of the crater, a bowl of fire stretching in every direction, with no ceiling above him and no solid ground that wasn't burning. He collected soil samples from the crater floor. Those samples were later analyzed by scientists at the Extreme Microbiome Project, and what they found was unexpected. The rocks at the bottom of a crater filled with 1,000-degree flames, saturated with methane and other gases, actively burning, contained living bacteria. Organisms not previously in any DNA database. Extremophile bacteria thriving in conditions that should, by almost any standard definition, be incompatible with life. Scientists noted that the discovery carried implications for astrobiology. If microbial life can survive inside the Darvaza crater, similar organisms could plausibly exist on other planets with hot, methane-rich atmospheres. The crater had become something no one anticipated when the Soviets lit it, a site of genuine scientific significance. For decades after independence, Turkmenistan's government had an ambivalent relationship with the crater. It was not, officially, something to be proud of, a hole created by an accident, named after hell, burning off resources that could otherwise be sold. Under the country's first post-Soviet president, Saparmurat Niyazov, it was largely ignored. When the second president, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, came to power, the government began cautiously opening Turkmenistan to tourism, and the crater became, almost by accident, the country's most internationally recognized landmark. Tens of thousands of tourists visited over the following years, a remarkable number for a country with one of the most restrictive travel regimes in the world. Berdimuhamedov's response was conflicted. In 2010 he ordered experts to find a way to extinguish the fire. Nothing came of it. In 2018, he officially renamed the crater the Shining of Karakum, apparently deciding that if the fire couldn't be put out, it could at least be given a better name. And then in January 2022, he appeared on Turkmenistan state television again, this time with a more explicit order: find a way to close the gates of hell permanently. He cited environmental damage and health concerns for nearby communities. He also cited economics. Every cubic meter of gas burning into the atmosphere, he said, was gas that could be exported and converted into revenue for the Turkmen people. Turkmenistan exports natural gas to China, Russia, Iran, and beyond. The crater was, in the most literal sense, burning money. Efforts to suppress the fire began in earnest. Workers drilled new wells around the crater's perimeter, designed to divert the methane supply away from the fire and release the gas in a controlled way, cutting off the fuel source. Previous attempts to simply fill the crater with rubble had failed. The new approach was more methodical, an attempt to starve the fire rather than smother it. And then, in 2025, something measurable happened. At an international scientific conference on hydrocarbon development held in Ashgabat in June 2025, Irina Lurieva, the head of the Scientific Research Institute at Turkmenistan state-owned energy company Turkmengas, announced that the crater's flames were visibly weakening. The glow that once lit the horizon for kilometers in every direction had reduced to, in her words, only a faint source of combustion. Scientists reported that the fire had diminished to nearly a third of its former intensity. Recent visitors to the site have described leaving disappointed, arriving after a 5-hour drive across the desert expecting an inferno and finding instead a handful of scattered flames in a charred, mostly dark pit. But here is where the story takes its most recent, and most counterintuitive, turn. When a flame burns methane, it converts that methane into carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, but methane, in the short term, is a far more potent one. Over a 20-year period, methane is roughly 86 times more powerful as a warming agent than carbon dioxide. The fire at Darvaza, for all its drama, was performing an unintended but real environmental service. It was converting the methane into something less harmful before it reached the atmosphere. As the fire dims, that conversion stops happening. Raw methane vents instead. Data collected by Carbon Mapper, a non-profit remote sensing organization based in California, showed that between 2022 and 2025, the crater was emitting an average of approximately 1,300 kilograms of methane per hour. A reading taken in October 2025, after suppression efforts had been underway for some time, showed that figure had risen to nearly 2,000 kilograms per hour. A peer-reviewed study published in Geophysical Research Letters in 2026, using hyperspectral satellite data from 5 different satellite instruments, estimated that over the 5-year period from 2020 to 2025, the crater released approximately 71,000 metric tons of methane. Extrapolated across the full history of the fire since ignition, the study estimated total methane emissions above 900,000 metric tons. And analysts have estimated the total market value of all the gas that has burned off at Darvaza since the fire began at somewhere around $300 million. Not in aggregate economic damage, just the raw commercial value of the gas, gone into the sky. So what is Darvaza, in the end? It is an accident that became a landmark. A miscalculation that became a mystery. A fire that was supposed to last weeks and has now outlasted the government that started it, the country that government represented, and every attempt made by 2 successive presidents to extinguish it. It sits in one of the most isolated places on Earth, in a desert that covers most of a country most people couldn't place on a map, and it glows orange in the dark in every direction for miles. The science of it is genuinely unresolved. The exact year it formed is uncertain. The exact year it was lit is uncertain. The question of whether the suppression efforts will ultimately stop the fire, or simply redirect its methane into the atmosphere unburned, remains open. The bacteria living at its floor are still being studied. And as of now, the crater is still, by any definition, burning. There is something almost fitting about that. The Soviets drilled into a geological structure they didn't fully understand, made a decision under pressure they believed would solve the problem in a matter of weeks, and then moved on. The problem did not move on. It has been waiting, patiently, in the middle of the desert ever since, roaring, glowing, and refusing to be told what to do. Some places exist because of what people built. Some exist because of what people found. And some exist because of a mistake that no one, even now, quite knows how to undo. The Darvaza gas crater is all 3 at once. There are places like this scattered across the Earth, locations that exist entirely outside of what anyone planned, where the ground itself has the final word. This channel is about exactly those places.